If you can see that, we can get started. Okay, this is a little different format for me than typical, but we'll give it a shot here. First of all, I'd like to say that I look pretty good for having been talking on the Susquehanna River for the last 40 years. But I want to thank the friends of Wildwood Park for inviting me to speak this evening. And this topic, the history of the Susquehanna River, is a pretty big topic to cover. So I can only touch on a few highlights. But for the most part, I'm going to focus on the part of the river between Harrisburg and the Chesapeake Bay. I've tried to pick out some things that might not be familiar to all of you. Hopefully you will find it entertaining and somewhat informative. My talk is entitled The Susquehanna, A Watered Down History, because we really have to strain some things out to get this down to a reasonable time. So I'm going to start off with just a couple facts, Susquehanna River facts. The Susquehanna is 444 miles long. It starts at Lake Otsego in Cooperstown, New York, runs to the Chesapeake Bay. It provides 50% of the bay's water, and that's equal to about 18 million gallons per minute on average. It drains about half of Pennsylvania, 27,000 square miles in total, parts of New York, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. And within that watershed are 49,000 miles of stream with 31,000 names. It's the longest non-navigable river in North America. And here we can kind of get an idea of the watershed. You can see we were starting in Cooperstown, New York. We traveled down to Havre de Grace, Maryland, at the mouth of the, at the head of the Chesapeake Bay. I'd like to say that the bay is really the river. It has just been flooded for the last 12,000 years or so, since the end of the last ice age. And here comes the water down through to the bay. But if that, if we were to have another ice age, the trough of the Susquehanna River would reappear, still there. The river is really old. You can see the Earth was born about 4.5 billion years ago. Earliest life began about 3 billion years ago. Single-celled organisms about 2 billion years ago. Earliest animals 1 billion years ago. I'm going to skip all of those first 3 billion years of history, stick to the last billion years. About 500 million years ago, we have trilobites. And then about 300 to 400 million years ago, the Susquehanna River was born there in the Pennsylvania period. Now, to put that into perspective, the first dinosaurs appeared on Earth 50 to 100 million years later. So the Susquehanna River was 100 million years old before the dinosaurs were roaming. When the Susquehanna River was born, the it was in the Pennsylvania period, but it's also part of the Carboniferous period. Carboniferous. So the plants that were would eventually form coal were growing. That time, Pennsylvania was covered in swampy forests of early trees that reproduce by spores, club mosses, ferns 50 feet tall. There were large amphibians crawling around. They were eating giant millipedes, scorpions, dragonflies with 2-foot wingspans, and cockroaches a foot long were roaming the swamps of Pennsylvania at that time. So 300 to 400 million years ago, we were here. This is when the continents were crashing together. When they collided to form Pangea, they pushed the Allegheny Mountains up around the Susquehanna. So Susquehanna didn't cut through mountains in its lifetime. The mountains actually grew up around it. Now, something they teach us in the interpretive business is that you should avoid using superlatives like biggest, oldest, first. But I'll be doing that as much as I can tonight. We'll start by answering the question, what's the oldest river in the world? So here we see the top 5 contenders, the Fink, the Neuse, the Susquehanna, the New River, and the French Broad River. You can see several of them are in the Allegheny Mountains. So let's take a close look here. Well, we can cross off the Fink River in Australia. I mean, it's maybe 400 million years old, but usually it's just a string of water. So we'll cross that one off. And the New River in North Carolina, West Virginia, and Virginia, now they often claim to be the oldest, but you know, it could be as young as 3 million years old. Ranges in general 260 to 325 million years, but you know, it doesn't really have a whole lot of water in it. It's only 8,700 cubic feet per second is its typical flow. So we're crossing that one off. The French Broad River, again, it doesn't put out that much water, even less than the New. We're going to cross off the Meuse River in France too, because really that just doesn't that doesn't drain a whole lot of water either. So therefore, I would say that the Susquehanna is the biggest, oldest river in the whole world. First of the superlatives. Susquehanna River is rocky. These sculpture-like shaped rocks emerge from the water and stretch across the river below the Conewago Falls in Falmouth, Pennsylvania, around York Haven Dam. This is one of the most expansive pothole fields uncovered in the United States. They are composed of diabase, a hard igneous rock, and as a result of erosion by the river and the swirling of sediment in the river, this has created really amazing formations on the stretch of the Susquehanna. You can see they can be pretty large potholes. And we move down the river a little bit. Now I realize I'm going to get into the geography, geology a little bit, but just a touch. Moving down the river a couple miles from the Conewago Falls is this large rock known as Chickies Rock, a large rock formation. And this rock is a giant mass of quartzite and quartz schist that started out as sandstone, but heat and pressure changed the rock into the denser quartzite. It's a rare rock deposit with multiple faults, thrusts, dips, ripples, and fossils that can be found throughout it. The surrounding rock in the valley was softer compared to the quartzite, and so that is weathered away and exposed this amazing curved dome-like structure that geologists call an anticline. Chickies Rock is a classic example of an anticline. In fact, Chickies Rock is the largest exposed anticline on the East Coast. Just to give you an idea how large it is, that red circle there is encircling a railroad car on the tracks that run in front of Chickies Rock. Now, some of the rocks of the river are below some of the rocks in the river have been placed there by the hands of man as a result of mining. In fact, so much coal has been washed down from the Scranton Wilkes-Barre area over the years. You know, when they mined in the old days, they left a lot of coal debris. Large amounts of that high quality anthracite coal particles washed downstream along with other silt and was deposited behind dams. In the early days, mining coal from the Susquehanna River bottom was performed by what was called the Susquehanna's Hard Coal Navy, and dredges scooped up the sediment from the river bottom onto barges. On the river between Danville and Sunbury, dredging began in the 1890s and continued into the 1950s. Between 1919 and 1920, over 2 million tons of coal was recovered from that part of the river. In the 1920s, dredging started on Lake Aldred, which is the lake behind Holtwood Dam in southern York County. That coal was used to fire a coal-fired power plant that stood next to the hydroelectric plant. And after Safe Harbor Dam was built in the 1930s, the Hard Coal Navy moved up to Lake Clark, which is the lake formed behind Safe Harbor Dam. And they continued dredging coal from behind Safe Harbor Dam until Hurricane Agnes flooded in 1972. So that operation consisted of dredges and barges. There was a coal washing plant, an area where the sediment that was removed was pumped. Over the years, all of those buildings disappeared. So none of what you can see in this picture exists today. This is what the last of the barges looked like that dredged the coal. And during the 22 years that the hard coal Navy was dredging at Lake Clark, over 10 million tons of coal were extracted from behind the dam. Sometimes the rock in the river lets go. And this is an example of a time when these river bottom let go. This is the Nox Mine Disaster. Happened in January of 1959. Miners were digging illegally under the Susquehanna River without taking the proper safety precautions. And sure enough, the roof of the mine caved in and created this huge whirlpool. It took 3 days of mitigation efforts, like pushing boxcars into the hole to close it off. 12 miners died, 69 others escaped, and the bodies of the 12 men who died were never recovered. The Susquehanna River starts small. Here is a view of the headwater of the Susquehanna at the foot of Lake Otsego in Cooperstown, New York. It gets really wide. Sometimes the claim is made that the widest point is in Harrisburg at about a mile. We like to think that the widest point is at the Zimmerman Center for Heritage, where the Susquehanna River is 1.67 miles across. Really wide, really shallow. It's really shallow, except for where it's narrow and deep. Below Columbia, Lancaster County, the part of is the part of the river that we call the Susquehanna Gorge. Below Turkey Hill, where the ice cream factory is located, the Susquehanna River is funneled to Port Deposit, Maryland, through a deep canyon-like gorge. The river squeezed through the quarter-mile wide gorge while dropping sharply, roughly 6 feet per mile, and gouged into the river's bedrock along this 40-mile-long gorge are 6 long, spoon-shaped depressions called the Susquehanna Deeps. And you can see this chart on the screen. If I can, I don't have a pointer here, but the light blue line represents the Susquehanna River water. The black lines that look squiggly are the river beds. So you can see that the river is generally, 6 feet deep, 7 feet deep. You're coming down the rapids past Turkey Hill, all of a sudden the water gets 60 feet deep, or 100 feet deep, or 130 feet deep. The deep below Holtwood Dam is 130 feet deep, and it actually goes about 20 feet, 30 feet below sea level, which is the dark blue line at the bottom, the Susquehanna Deeps. Now, there's a story that back in the early 1900s, there was a gentleman in Maryland who had a car that was not functioning properly. He pushed it into one of these deeps. The deep was called Job's Hole. About 6 months later, He was driving around the streets of Baltimore. He sees his car, it still had his license plate on it. He stopped the driver, asked where he had gotten it, and the driver said he found it along the shore of the Chesapeake. So there are a lot of myths and folklore that have grown up around these deeps, that they might be bottomless, that they might be connected to underground caverns, that things can get sucked in and come back out miles away. But really an amazing feature of the Susquehanna River. Now, the Susquehanna River is non-navigable. The largest non-navigable river in North America, for another superlative. It's non-navigable in the sense that it has never been able to accommodate commercial ships, with a slight caveat there. So when settlers started arriving, Europeans started arriving to this country, they would cross the river by fording it. Ford is a shallow part of the river that you can cross without a boat. And this slide shows the best fords on the river between Harrisburg and just below the Maryland line. In 1778, during the American Revolution, Continental Congress commissioned a team of French engineers to travel this section of the river and make a survey of all the possible fording places. It's interesting to superimpose a map of Native American paths in the area, and you can see that many of these fording places were used by Native Americans for many, many years before settlers began using them. Now, of course, the Native people here, this is the Susquehannock homeland. Susquehannock Indians are people who moved in to the area of the lower Susquehanna River about 1550. They would have been using craft like this dugout canoe to go back and forth across the river. Now, the thing about dugout canoes is that they will go down a river really well, not so easy to get them back up. So when folks talk about them traveling up and down the river in these canoes, not so much. Back and forth was the primary use. Now, in colonial times, ferries were established. This is a painting of a ferry crossing the river at Wright's Ferry, which is just below Chickies Rock. You can see Chickies Rock in the background, and the ferry runs from Columbia, Lancaster County to Ratesville, York County. In the beginning, the ferries would sometimes be a number of dugout canoes. They did it Native American style, a variation of Native American style. You can see how these dugout canoes were actually pinned together. The wagons loaded onto them, and the horses and mules made the swim across the river. Eventually, there were numerous ferries from Harrisburg down to Havre de Grace. And this 1770 map of Pennsylvania shows the ones that were in existence at that time. And to the right of that is a listing of the various ferries that crossed from the early 1700s into the mid 1800s. You can see just how many there were. Figuring out which ferry is which is really it takes some effort. They were renamed over and over depending on who was operating them at the time. But this gives you an idea of how many crossings there were on this lower Susquehanna River. Now, one of those crossings was at Anderson's Ferry, which became Glatt's Ferry. And if you see that little sawmill over there on the to the right side of the screen, there we go, that guy right there, that's my house there. You can see what the what the ferries looked like in the mid 1800s. This is a famous ferry crossing, not just because I lived there or because Lafayette stood in my front yard. It is also famous because this was the place where America's first, another superlative, iron steamboat was launched. That steamboat was called the Cadorus, and it was launched in 1825, first iron steamboat. Believe it or not, that steamboat actually traveled the Susquehanna River. It started in York Haven and ran the whole way to Binghamton, New York. So, not so non-navigable, is it? Well, they decided it wasn't going to be a very profitable venture. They had significant difficulties getting up the river. Eventually, the Cadorus was sold and it moved to North Carolina, finished off its life as a ferry in North Carolina. While we're talking about boats, I would want to talk just a little bit about a peculiar boat that is unique to the lower Susquehanna River. And this boat is called a Susquehanna Rollover. It is a duck hunting boat. And you can see this gentleman paddling out on the river. The idea is, you can see in his hands, he has a very short paddle. The idea is you kind of get close to the ducks, you roll the boat up, way up on its side so that it's still floating, but then you use the side of the boat as a duck blind. Now, we have a Susquehanna rollover in our collection here at the Zimmerman Center. And we know who built this boat. His name was Noah Kesey. And he was a gentleman who lived in Columbia, Pennsylvania. He fought in the Civil War and built this boat shortly after, about 1866, 1867. He was a well-known man around Columbia. In addition to duck hunting, he was a, let's say, well-known fisherman whose name also often appeared in the newspaper. For example, in 1872, the Columbia newspaper says a riot broke out at Bittner's Drinking Saloon. The first report in the Daily Evening Express claimed that a man named Ammer was shot in the cheek by a pistol ball fired by another man named Kesey. November 22nd, Kesey attempted to charge Augustus Weiss with assault and battery during the riot at Bittner's. Unfortunately, Conrad Bittner and others testified against him, saying he had started the altercation by throwing a brick at John Ammon. 1880, he was indicted for violation of the law against fishing within a quarter-mile of Columbia Dam. 1887, he was charged with assault and battery. In 1905, there was a general roundup of fishermen accused of using fish baskets, which was illegal, including Noah, and on and on and on. He was a real river person. Now, it's kind of a misnomer to say that the Susquehanna River is non-navigable. It, for the majority of our time here, has been non-navigable. But there was a short period from the 1830s until close to 1900 when it was actually navigable. This is a canal boat on the lower part of the Susquehanna and Tidewater Canal. In the 1830s, there was an effort to make the river navigable to commercial traffic. And the canal, which started at Columbia and ran to Havre de Grace, Maryland, was constructed in the 1830s, opened in 1840. This canal made it possible to carry lumber, coal, iron, fertilizer, grain, passengers from Columbia to the bay, and from the bay to Columbia and onward to the Pennsylvania Canal. Pennsylvania had an extensive network of canals. You could actually go the whole way from south to north, east to west in Pennsylvania by canal. This particular photograph here shows the entrance of the Susquehanna and Tidewater Canal at Ratesville, the northern terminus. This picture is taken in about 1885. You can see you can see over to the left a steamboat that was used to pull the canal boats from the York County shoreline, where the Susquehanna Tidewater Canal was, to the Lancaster County shoreline, where it joined up with the Pennsylvania Canal. This shows the Pennsylvania Canal as it passed under the Rockville Bridge. To the right is the Pennsylvania Canal at Steelton, a lock in the canal. The upper left is the canal basin at above Chickies Rock, below Marietta. And the lower photograph is the Columbia Canal Basin around 1901. Now, there was a tremendous amount of traffic on these canals. In 1885, there were over 8,000 canal boat trips on the Susquehanna and Tidewater Canal. 1855. Now, the canals had a fatal flaw. Right around the time they started building canals, they started building railroads. And by the 1850s, the railroads were taking over. By 1894, the Susquehanna and Tidewater Canal was no longer being used. And so the upper left-hand photograph shows a canal boat left to rot along the shore of the canal in Dolphin. The lower left is one of the last canal boats to pass on the through the lock at Dolphin on the Pennsylvania Mainline Canal. And the photograph on the lower right is what one of the locks it looks like today on the Susquehanna Tidewater Canal. That's Lock 12, which is in southern York County. I have to put a plug in here for Susquehanna National Heritage Area. We are hoping that the river will be navigable for our new tour boat that we will be introducing here next summer. This boat is the Chief Uncas. It spent the first 104 years of its life on Otsego Lake in Cooperstown, New York. It was built for a gentleman by the name of Augustus Bush in 1911. He was the founder of Anheuser-Busch, and he had had a boat prior to this, a gas-powered boat that had had an engine fire. So he went to a company called the Elco Electric Launch Company, Boat Works in Bayonne, New Jersey in 1911, and had this electric boat built for him. So it's a 55-foot mahogany launch, and it is still electric powered. So we will be offering tours of the Susquehanna River, Lake Clark area, in the area from Ratesville to Safe Harbor Dam, starting hopefully in July. It has it's moved from Cooperstown, New York, 400 miles downstream. So it has never left the Susquehanna River. The Susquehanna River has been bridged. I just picked out two bridges to comment on. The first is up above Harrisburg, the Rockville Bridge. I picked these out because I can use superlatives with them also. So the Rockville Bridge is the longest stone masonry arch railroad bridge in the world. It was built between 1900 and 1902, and its 48 arches run a length of 3,820 feet. the longest masonry stone arch bridge in the world, railroad bridge in the world. We moved down the river to the Columbia-Ratesville Bridge, and I'll put in another plug for Susquehanna National Heritage Area. The building in the foreground is Columbia Crossing Rail Trail Center, very popular starting point for hiking one of our numerous rail trails in York and Lancaster County. But the bridge between Columbia and Ratesville was begun in 1929 as part of the Lincoln Highway, which was America's first transcontinental highway. Started in Atlantic City, I believe, and goes out to, the Pacific Ocean out in California. The town escapes me right now. That bridge is 6,657 feet long. That's about 1.25 miles, making it the longest concrete arch highway bridge in the world. So our section of the Susquehanna River from Harrisburg down to the Maryland line has its share of big bridges. Just above the Columbia-Ratesville Bridge is another significant bridge. If you drive over the Veterans Memorial Bridge these days, you can see the piers of this bridge still remaining. That bridge was the second bridge to cross the Susquehanna. It was completed in 1834. At that time, it was the longest wooden covered bridge in the world. And this bridge is significant not only because it was such a long covered bridge. This bridge prevented Confederate troops from crossing the Susquehanna during the Civil War. They had come up through Maryland into New York, had wanted to cross the bridge at Ratesville. Their goal is to get to Harrisburg or Philadelphia, where they could wreak havoc. If they would have made it, the war may have had a very different outcome. There was a small contingent of Union militia who decided that their best defense would be to take out a couple sections of the wooden bridge. They planted explosives between two of the piers. The explosives did not work, so they poured kerosene on the bridge, lit it on fire. The fire burned spectacularly well. In fact, it consumed the entire bridge and burned into the town of Ratesville. In the irony of war, people fight for their country, but they're still human beings. In the irony of the war, the Confederate troops actually helped put the fire out in Columbia. So the river's been bridged, the river's been dammed. Again, I'm not going to talk a whole lot about all of the dams on the Susquehanna River. On the section between Harrisburg and Havre de Grace, Maryland, there are 4 hydroelectric plants. Holtwood, starting from the south, Conowingo Dam, Holtwood Dam, Safe Harbor Dam, and furthest north is this dam, which is the dam at York Haven. Now, this is a pretty cool old dam. It's only about 19 feet high. It's constructed of stone. And the amazing thing about this dam is that when it was built, when it was open in 1904, unfortunately, I can't say it was the largest one in the world, but it was the third largest hydroelectric plant in the world. The largest was the plant at Niagara, New York. I don't recall what the second largest was. This dam is a real thrill to go to see if you walk on the catwalk that you see in front of it there. You can watch the water springing through leaks in the dam. Really an interesting place to go visit. And this power plant, even though it's over 100 years old, is still using some of its original equipment. Now, the river's been dammed, but the river's also been dammed. This is a slide showing York Haven Power Plant on around March. Just 1 second. I lost the date, but we'll come up in here. We'll advance the slide to you. March 8th, 1904. We think down of floods happening in the summertime. Floods that happen in the wintertime can be even more destructive. This is one of the largest flows, which is what they call an ice flood, the largest flows in history. This is a photo of the part of the town of Collins, which was a small town above Bainbridge, and just a little north of York Haven. This town is no longer in existence. The flood completely wiped it out. You can get an idea of what an ordeal it would be to have to deal with a flood like this. Those folks are trying to shovel out the rail line that ran through Collins. They did have heavy equipment there, but just a massive job. This is a little bit further down the river, the town of Safe Harbor. Safe Harbor was also a fairly good size community that was completely wiped out by this flood. The river has been dammed. You may remember Hurricane Agnes, 1972. The average flow of the Susquehanna River is about 14,000 cubic feet per second of water. The river flow during Hurricane Agnes was 1 million cubic feet per second of water. Caused $2 billion in damage. This painting is a painting from our collection here at the Zimmerman Center. We have a collection of art that deals specifically with the Susquehanna River. Our superlative is we believe it's the only permanent collection of art that deals specifically with the river. The little angel on the donkey, I believe, is Agnes. And if you remember that flood, you'll remember that in Wilkes-Barre, Scranton area, the flood had such force that it actually brought coffins up in cemeteries. Well, the river had shad. Shad is a fish, a species of fish that lives its life in the Atlantic River and the Atlantic Ocean. It travels from Newfoundland to Florida, but in the spring of the year, it returns to rivers, much like a salmon, to reproduce. Before dams were built on the Susquehanna, shad ran here in the millions. This particular photograph, the aerial photograph, is a part of the river in northern York County called Saginaw. And you can see all across the river here, these little V's. Now this photograph was taken, I think, in the 1950s. These V's are fish weirs. And you can see the dam coming across here. These are stone constructions that were used to funnel fish, concentrate them so that they could be gathered in baskets and nets. Some of these weirs may have been built by Native Americans. It was a technique that they used, but Europeans also used these weirs not only to harvest shad, but they also used them to harvest eels. I wasn't kidding when I said that the runs were in the millions of shad. The records for numbers of shad are sparse, but we know that in 1806, in just 2 fisheries, over 22,000 shad were caught on the Susquehanna near Columbia, Pennsylvania. Now, there were dozens of fisheries up and down the shoreline. A typical season would be 10 to 20,000 shad per net. And in fact, an old timer from up the river near Bloomsburg, PA, said that in the early 1800s, from the banks of the river at his fishery could be seen great schools of shad coming up the river when they were a quarter-mile distant. They came in such numbers and so compact as to cause or produce a wave or rising of the water in the middle of the river, extending from shore to shore. So the shad were greatly affected by the dams that have been placed in the river. It obviously prevents their progress. And so in this case, the river was dammed, and it was also dammed. This shows the river below Columbia, where there was a dam built so that canal boats could travel from the Susquehanna and Tidewater Canal across the river and connect up with the Pennsylvania Canal. When that dam was built, it infuriated fishermen, and they had what became known as the Shad Wars. They would actually blow up sections of the dam, trying to get rid of it. they would fight over the best fishing places. And it could be a real scene. Excuse me just a second here. Okay. The river has had protectors. Some of these protectors who've tried to help the Shad. This is a photograph of the Shad lift at Safe Harbor Dam. And it is essentially kind of reminds me of a dumpster. The low end of the dumpster down here, the fish, there's actually sort of a maze that they swim through that has flashing lights and a swift current. They swim through this maze, they go into the one end of the dumpster-like container, they close the door, the elevator comes up, they open the other door, and the fish swim out this end. There's actually a hole in the side of window in the side of the container, and there's a gentleman who counts every fish as it goes past the window. That gentleman says that job can get quite boring. There have been times when we've had over 100,000 shad come up that elevator over the course of the year. The population of shad on the river has really fluctuated. Sometimes it is just in a couple tens of thousands, so maybe 20, 30,000. They're trying, every dam has either a fish ladder or some mechanism to help the fish as much as possible. Another superlative. This photograph at the on the bottom is a photograph of Mount Johnson Island. Mount Johnson Island is in the section of the river above Holtwood Dam in Lancaster County. And Mount Johnson Island is home of the world's first eagle sanctuary. And these two postcards are from the 1920s. The one showing the island, and the other one you can just kind of make out that eagle over in here. Now, the story of eagles on the Susquehanna is an amazing one. They were almost non-existent. I think I was maybe 40 years old before I saw my first eagle on the river. We see them almost every day on the section of the river that's called Lake Clark, the section above Safe Harbor Dam. And before I go past that slide, I'll note that one of the best places to watch eagles on the East Coast is at Conowingo Dam. That's the dam that crosses the river just above the Maryland line. It's where Route 1 crosses the river. And you can go down there in late fall, early winter, and see really dozens of eagles fishing in the water, the swift water below the dam. This photograph is of the Conajohela Flats. And This is another great place to look at the birds. It's this is designated as a by the National Audubon Society as an important bird area, and it's a significant component of the Atlantic flyway. So these islands are a result of sediment backing up behind Safe Harbor Dam. They provide a shallow water with a really rich food supply for migratory birds. Kind of reminds me of an estuary along the ocean. Each year, some 17,000 migratory shorebirds will stop here to rest and feed on their journey to breeding grounds as far north as the Arctic, or their wintering grounds in South America or Central America. And over 38 species of birds have been identified on that in these flats. Great place to see bird life. In the late winter, early spring, so just around the corner from now, come the snow geese and tundra swans, and there will be times in late February to early March when there will be upwards of 5,000 tundra swans on this part of the river. Really an incredible sight. The river has inspired. As I mentioned, we have a collection of art that was inspired by the Susquehanna River. This is one of the images of the Lake Clark area of the Susquehanna, painted by artist Mark Workman. The river's inspired people to create art for ages. This is the river below Safe Harbor Dam. And on this section of the river are a group of amazing places where Native people created rock art. So these are the Safe Harbor Petroglyphs. And the Safe Harbor Petroglyphs are a number of sites. There are about 6 or 7 rocks in that part of the river where Native people have carved these images into the stone. These images are of things that were important to these people. You can see images of serpents and birds and humans, human tracks. There are abstract designs. These images were carved, we think, not by the Susquehanna people, but by the people who lived on this part of the river before them. We know them as the Shanks Ferry people. And Native people consider these sites as sacred places. They're particularly significant in that at Safe Harbor there are carvings on the rocks that point to the places on the horizon where the sun rises or sets on at the beginning of each of the seasons. So if you were to stand at the tail of this serpent on the first day of summer, the sun would set directly in line with it. On the first day of winter, it's the reverse. And there are paraserpents that emerge from the rising sun on the first day of spring. Really an amazing a thing that you can see right here on the Susquehanna River that normally you would think of in places like the American Southwest, Chaco Canyon, or Chichen Itza on the Yucatan Peninsula. And finally, the river's beautiful. It has inspired people to make its shores their home. It has provided resources for people for thousands of years. It's a place that we should treasure, take care of, and enjoy. And I'll wrap up with the words of Robert Louis Stevenson, who was crossing the Susquehanna in 1879 and wrote these words. And when I asked the name and heard that it was called the Susquehanna, the beauty of the name seemed to be part and parcel of the beauty of the land. That was the name, as no other could be, for that shining river and desirable valley. And with that, I will thank you. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to see if I can answer them.
Thank you very much, Paul. There were a couple questions that came in. One of them was from Ruby, and they asked, where is the lowest and highest points on the river? If you know,
Well,
put you on the spot.
The highest point would be the end of Lake Otsego in Cooperstown, and the lowest point would be at the bottom of one of the deeps below Wildwood Dam, actually. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
All right, I think it does. All right, and then we had another one from Karen. She asked if anyone has ever dove down into those deeper parts of the river, and if they did, what did they find?
The deeps are now filled with sediment, so they are no longer deep. But I have heard stories of divers who have been in the river below Wildwood Dam. They talk of encountering some pretty big fish down there, like 6 foot long catfish.
Wow. I would imagine that's just like the ocean. The deeper you go, the bigger things get sometimes.
And the river is not the Caribbean, you know. It's not crystal clear water. It's murky, and I'm not sure I would want to encounter a creature like that.
That is true. All right, and then someone else just asked if you could talk just a little bit more about the Zimmerman Center. What is that? Where is it? Things like that.
Sure. So the Zimmerman Center for Heritage is a historic building along the Susquehanna River. It's about 4 miles south of Ratesville. One of the things that I didn't mention about the Susquehanna River is that it is part of the Captain John Smith Chesapeake National Historic Trail, which is the nation's first water trail, all-water trail, and it's composed of the Chesapeake Bay and the 5 major rivers that flow into it, the Susquehanna being the largest one. and the Zimmerman Center for Heritage serves as a visitor contact station for the John Smith Trail. We are also adjacent to Native Lands County Park, which is the place where the Susquehanna people had their last settlement in the 1670s. And part of our work here is to help interpret the story of the Native people who lived on the Susquehanna River. So we have a gallery that's devoted specifically to the Susquehanna, and you can take a short hike up to their settlement site, and it's a great place. You can kind of stand in the footsteps of the people who called this place their home, the Native people. We do all kinds of things. We partner with the National Park Service. If you're familiar with junior ranger programs, we offer junior ranger programs, lectures, and have a great art collection also.
Yes, and we were, myself and my coworkers, we were just at the Zimmerman Center. I think it was just a couple months ago, and it is a great place to go if you haven't been there. Definitely take a day and drive down. It's a beautiful area. It was a great drive too, and it's not that far from Harrisburg. So definitely.
It's a great old building too. We've been here
is.
since about 1750, one of the first buildings west of the Susquehanna.
All right, there was one other question that came in. What was the purpose of the canals versus just using the river? Were there canals for northern destinations only?
Well, the canals were incredibly important. There is just no way that that you could get from the bay to Harrisburg by river. So the Susquehanna River is it runs kind of backwards compared to most rivers. Most rivers start really steep and end flat. The Susquehanna runs for its first 400 miles really flat and shallow, and then it becomes really steep when you get to York and Lancaster County. It drops off severely. There were wicked rapids, lots of rocks. It was just really, really difficult to bring a boat up the river. So the Susquehanna and Tidewater Canal is the one that I'm most familiar with down here. So Columbia, Pennsylvania is about 230 feet above sea level. 39 miles to the south is the Chesapeake Bay, which is sea level. So over that 39 miles, you have to drop 230 feet. So a canal, Susquehanna Tidewater Canal had, I think, 28 locks. Each one of those locks is maybe 23 locks. Each one of those locks lowered you about 10 feet further closer to sea level. So that's what made it possible for canal boats to bring their goods either up or down the river.
Okay, very nice, thank you. I didn't see any other questions come in, but I think someone mentioned this to me before, and obviously I wasn't alive then, but this is the 50th anniversary of Agnes this year. So of course, you mentioned Agnes, and we all know, we've seen the photos, been there. But yeah, I think that's a pretty neat thing too. And I didn't realize that when I chose the Susquehanna for this lecture series. So I think that fits kind of well.
It makes me feel old. I showed you the picture, the 1860 picture of my house, which you can see was well above the shore of the Susquehanna River. I didn't live in that house during Hurricane Agnes, but I heard that people were docking boats at our porch.
Oh, wow.
So when you live along the river, you learn to respect it. And well, I like to say it's the best place in the world to live 99% of the time. The other 1%, it can be a little tough.
Yes, I hear that a lot from
We've
people who
been
live
through
there.
several floods though, and I look out my window in the morning. I can't imagine not living by the river.
Yes. All right. Well, I want to thank you again, Paul. There were not any other questions then. So thank you for joining us this evening and giving us a great history and background of the Susquehanna River. We really appreciate it. And I just want to say again, if you are available and you have not registered for our other lectures, the second one will be in 2 weeks, and then we'll have one 2 weeks later in February. The last one is on February 22nd. They'll also all be related to the river. I will type our email address here into the chat, and you can go on there. I don't know if I can talk and type at the same time. And register for those if you have not done so already. I did record this, so it will be shared with everyone later on. But I want to thank you all again for joining us, and we hope to see you at all of our other lectures this year as well. So, thanks again, Paul. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.